All right, let's get started. So welcome to Developers Las Vegas. So I was just thinking about it today morning. How would a Developers Las Vegas be? So let's say you check into a hotel and the lady at the front desk goes, "We don't have keys to your room. You've got to implement an algorithm and then enter the room." Right? So you go check into your room, then write some code, implement an algorithm, and then get into your room. You check into the room, then change, and perhaps go back to the casino floor. And in the casino floor, you'll not find any slot machines in the Developers Las Vegas. All of that will be replaced with coding hackathons, where it will say that participate in this hackathon and perhaps win $1 million. That is how Developers Las Vegas would be. And none of the shows in Las Vegas would have any people in it because the developers out there would be busy attending various trainings, attending the new React training or Vue.js training. So that is how a Developers Las Vegas would be, filled with code. So what I'm going to do today in my session is to show you a lot of code, but at the same time, I want to keep it really simple. So you'll see a lot of simple examples that provide you enough value. You could get a good sense of all the new feature additions that we have done in ColdFusion 2018. At least the most important features in ColdFusion 2018, you will get a good understanding of all those features. So let's get started on an adventure ride. The audio is not playing up. Okay. Has anybody tried that here in the audience? I definitely want to try that out. So that's the sky jump at Stratosphere. So the relation to the features that I'll be talking about is, as a CFML developer, I finally have the null support and data type preservation. And because of that, I'm willing to jump from Stratosphere. So that is how excited I am as a ColdFusion developer with the null support being there finally. So null wasn't really an issue within ColdFusion, but what was happening was as ColdFusion interacts with more of JavaScript, more of database, the database nulls, how would ColdFusion handle the database nulls? How would it handle the JavaScript nulls? That is where the issue came in, and that's why we introduced the JavaScript, the real null support in ColdFusion. We also have the data type preservation. You heard about it in the keynote as well. So any types, if it's a string, it would be interpreted as string in ColdFusion 2018. If it's a Boolean, it would be continue to be a Boolean in ColdFusion 2018. Okay, so let's start off with the null support. These were the major issues. So let's say there was null in JavaScript, and that came into ColdFusion. So ColdFusion would treat that variable that is assigned to null as undefined. So what is undefined? Undefined is the variable does not even exist. That is not true here, right? So we still have a variable that has just been assigned null. It's not undefined. But that's how ColdFusion used to behave before introducing the null support. Second one is the database nulls. So what used to happen is if there is a null in the database, when you read it into ColdFusion, ColdFusion would convert that to an empty string to make life easy for you developers, but it was actually a problem. Because once you have that empty string, when you try to put that empty string back into the database, all your nulls will be replaced by empty string, and you don't want that, right? So let us see some quick code to understand this better. As I said, we're going to see a lot of code in my session, and at the same time, it will all be simple examples. So that's ColdFusion Builder. Let me just go to null support here. Okay, so this is real code in script mode. So most of my examples today, you'll see it in the CF script mode. Those of you who are used to the tag syntax will still be able to pick it up. But because I don't have any HTML output in all my examples, I'm using the script syntax mostly, which is very easy to understand. So what I'm trying to do here is there's a simple CF HTTP call, okay, and it's trying to get from a URL. Okay, so let's see what is the output of this URL. It's trying to return some JSON data. So I just want to show you the problem that we had with the null support and how we are fixing it now. Okay, so what you see there is JSON response. I just want to make sure it's visible at the back. So if you notice, there is an email field which is set to null. So let's see how ColdFusion used to handle it before the null support. Let me go back here. So what we're trying to do in this example is I'm just trying to dump the JSON data, and I'm doing a deserialized JSON. So what is deserialized JSON? So I'm trying to convert JavaScript JSON data into ColdFusion types. That is what deserialized JSON does. And once I'm done with that, I'm trying to access the email field. That is what had null before, right? So in the JSON data, that is what had null. I'm trying to access that element. Now, I want to make sure that null is disabled. I'll come to that setting in just a bit. So this is test.cfm with null. When I run this example, let me just run this now. Go to null support, run this. You'll first see a dump of the JSON data that we just saw, and this is the deserialized response that ColdFusion got. So what ColdFusion did now was it assigned email as undefined. It's definitely defined, right? It's a variable that has just been assigned a null value. That is all. Now, what the issue is, ColdFusion would throw the element email is undefined. That was the issue with the lack of the null support. Now, the only fix that I need to do now is within my application CFC, I have a null setting, enable null support, just turn it on to true, and that's it. All the nulls will be nulls now. It's completely backward compatible, and now you'll see that email is now set to null, and my code is not breaking. It's as simple as that, just enabling the null support. Similarly, let's look at an example from the database. Again, a simple example. I'm just trying to retrieve records from the database here, and I'm trying to select a particular row which has art ID as 60. I'm trying to fetch that because I know that some of the fields in that database record has null in it. And let's see how ColdFusion used to handle now and how it will handle with the new support. I just want to make sure that I turn back the null support off, so that just to see the behavior that used to happen before we introduced the null support, this time in ColdFusion 2018. Okay, so when I hit this, run the database.cfm. So this is just a list of all the records in my CF Art Gallery database. So the one that I'm interested in is this one right here. So let me just zoom it up a little bit. So you see that this record here actually had nulls in the database, but when ColdFusion interpreted it, it replaced that with empty string. And that's not what I want, because database nulls have to be nulls in my application as well. Now, the fix is, you don't need those hacks anymore. I'm sure all of you have written a lot of hacks to make this work. You don't need that anymore. All you need to do is just enable null support. Let me just go back here, enable null support, run the example again, and you will see that ColdFusion interpreted null as null, and you don't need those hacks anymore for nulls from the database or nulls from the JavaScript. So that's the first one. Then the second one is data type preservation. So ColdFusion is a typeless language. So what it used to do earlier was it used to interpret, just let's take that example. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 within quotes, within double quotes. So as a user, I would want to, as a ColdFusion developer, when I give 1, 2, 3, 4 within quotes, I mean to use it as a string, right? But what ColdFusion used to do was it will interpret that as 1, 2, 3, 4 number, and that is not what I really want. If you look at the second example, 0, 0, 5, 6, 7, 8 within string again. So ColdFusion used to interpret that as 5, 6, 7, 8 number, which I don't really want. The last one is really interesting. So I have a true or a yes, which is a string. I basically want a string there. ColdFusion used to convert that to a Boolean true, which I don't really want, right? So what we've done now is our engineers have done an amazing job to let the data, so during compile time, we figure out we infer the types and store the data type. So you don't have to worry about such conversions at all going forward. So let me just show you this in action. I'm going to use CF Fiddle for it. How many of you know about CF Fiddle? Not a lot of you, I'm surprised. Okay, so CF Fiddle, you can actually run CFML code on the browser. You don't even have to install ColdFusion for that. And you can also switch versions. So I just type in the code there, it shows me the result right there on the browser, cffiddle.org. That is where you need to access it. The nice thing about this is you can also create your own projects. So if you log in, it'll let you create your projects as well on cffiddle.org. You can share your projects. So let's say you run into an issue and you want some help. Rather than pasting this huge code snippet on, let's say, forums, you can just provide a Fiddle link, share that link with others. Others can watch that link, fix that code for you in real time, and then share the link back. All of that is possible with cffiddle.org. So really powerful. I definitely encourage you to take a look at cffiddle.org. So we will see how I can use CF Fiddle for this data type preservation as well. So going to data type preservation. So I have a sample code here, which I'm going to paste in CF Fiddle. Copy this up, go back here. So what I'm trying to do here is I have an employee struct, and I have an ID, to which I'm assigning a string variable. Name is John, age is 23, and I just have a variable, does John smoke? And I have no as a string. Now the reason why I have no as a string is I want this to be interpreted as a string. I don't want the Boolean no here, because my JavaScript, I want to display that string. So let's see this behavior in ColdFusion 2016 first. So all I have to do is just switch the version here. You'll see that combo box right there. So I'm going to ColdFusion build at ColdFusion 2016 and update 6. Over the years, we actually fixed quite a few issues in ColdFusion 2016, but we still didn't preserve the data types associated. So when I run this, you will see that smoke, my no, was converted to false in ColdFusion 2016 because we were not preserving the data types. Imagine the hacks you would have to introduce on the JavaScript side to make sure that false is actually treated as a no string, right? You don't have to do that anymore. So if I switch to ColdFusion 2018 and run the same example, all my data type is preserved. Smoke is retained as a no in the JSON side. When I serialize to JSON, this is the output, and I don't have to worry about anything else. I'm just outputting the serialized JSON response. So string is a string, Boolean is a Boolean with ColdFusion 2018. So no more hacks with the null support as well as the data type preservation. So do you guys like it? No more hacks. Great. All right, so that was the null support and data type preservation. Moving on to our next adventure without the audio, because the audio is not playing for some reason. So that's one other thrill ride in Las Vegas. I just wanted to bring these rides in because us developers are excited with all the code, right? So it's as good as an adventure ride for us. So that is why I brought in all this. So what the ride that you just saw was Big Shot at Stratosphere again. So we are going to discuss object-oriented programming now. The relation to the ride is just like how Big Shot elevated you to the next level, object-oriented programming, the new support, can take your programming to the next level. So that's why I use that ride. So let's talk about abstract, default functions and interface, as well as the final support. So I'll have some really simple examples to help you understand these concepts, and then we'll see some real code as well. So all of us are developers here mostly. So developers, what do? We code, we meet deadlines, we respond to urgent emails, and we also have to be available on calls, right? These are the various things that we do as developers. Now, if I have to represent this as a CFC, as a ColdFusion component, how would I do that? Let me just show you some code for that. Developer.cfc. Just expand this out. Is the code visible at the back? Can you see the code? Great. Okay, so that is developer.cfc, a simple class. I don't have any implementation in that, but these are my function. Code, respond to urgent emails, meet deadlines, and be available on calls. Okay, that's my base class. Now, every developer will have a skill set of their own. So there is no developer instance as such, right? But we have CF developers who have CF as their skill. So what I'm trying to do now is create a CF developer component that extends, that inherits from the developer class, okay, and I call it CF developer. Then I have JS developer as well that extends from developer class again, and I have a PHP developer as well that extends from the developer class, okay? Now, if you look at ColdFusion developer, we all know that we cheat with CFML, right? We just write a few lines of code and get away with that. So I wanted to represent that in the code as well. So within code, I have, this is not available in JavaScript or for the JavaScript developer or the PHP developer. It's only for the CF developer. Use the CFML cheat book, and CFML cheat book outputs, yeah, I'm done already. So that is CF developer. So it extends from the developer class. Now, what I also want to do is, I should be able to create instances of CF developer, PHP developer, or the JavaScript developer, but I don't want to be able to create instances of the developer itself because just a developer doesn't have any meaning. It's only developer with a skill. So how do I avoid this? I don't want anybody to create instances of the base class, which is developer. For that, all I have to do is go to the developer class and make that abstract. So that's the new keyword that we have, abstract. So I can create an abstract component, and when I try to create an instance of an abstract component, it's going to error out. It'll not let me create an instance of the abstract class. So that is what I want to quickly show you here. Go down. So many classes here. To execute test.cfm. Okay, so it's clearly telling me that you cannot create an abstract component. So that is abstract classes in a nutshell. You will not be able to create instances, but it can still be a part of your entire implementation. So that's abstract. Now let's get back to my slide. So we saw the CF developer. What about CF developers at CF Summit? So imagine, I'm just imagining that how would you have made your way to CF Summit? You would have gone to your boss and said that, hey, I want to attend ColdFusion Summit. So your boss would have said, but hey, it's going to cost me money. What's my return on investment? What's my ROI? I'm guessing that's when you would have said, you know what? I'm going to promise to you that I will implement at least 3 best practices that I learn at the conference and come back and implement at the organization. So that's the promise that you would have made to your boss. So I have made we all make promises to our boss, right? I have made a similar promise to my boss saying that I'm going to make this session really successful. So make sure that you fill up the session survey at the end of the session if you really like the session. Okay, so that is the promise that I made. So first, CF developers at CF Summit would learn the best practices, have a great time at the summit party. How many of you have been to one of our summit parties in the evening? Okay, great. I'm sure all of you have had a great time, right? So we definitely have a great time at the summit party, and especially this time, I'm told that this party is going to be really, really great. So make sure you're there by 6 p.m. tonight. And finally, promise to your boss is fine, but what about promise to yourself? We are in Las Vegas. We want to have a good time as well. So we definitely want to play gamble and win at the craps table as well. So that is what a CF developer at CF Summit typically does. Now, if I have to express this in code, how do I go about doing that? Let me just show you that. So I have a CF Summit interface that defines a set of functions. Okay, so let me I'll comment this out for the moment. Okay, so I have an interface, which is CF Summit, and I have 3 functions that we just discussed. Learn the best practices, have a great time at the summit party, and also win at the craps table. That's really important, right? We should have a good time as well. Okay, so I have this functionality for CF Summit. Now I'm creating a CF developer at CF Summit. So that's a new class that I have that extends from CF developer, and it also implements the CF Summit interface. So I have this learn best practices, have a great time at the summit party, and win at the craps table. Now, having a great time at the summit party is a given, right? We definitely have a great time. Now, I can actually bump up this implementation in the interface itself using the default function interface. So let me just quickly show you that. So I don't need to just define this function in my interface. I can also implement this function as a default implementation. So I just have a function which says, write output, yes, I definitely have a great time. So this is default functions in interface that we've introduced in ColdFusion 2018. Now, let's take a look at final. That's the last one under object-oriented programming. So final comes in 3 forms. So we have support for final at the variable level. When you make a variable final, what it means is you'll not be able to change the value of the variable at all. So let me just show you some code for that. cfdeveloper, let's go to cfdeveloper.cfc. I have a function called change skill, and I have final skill cfml. And I'm trying to change that to new skill. Since I have declared this as final, I should not be able to change it. So let's run this once and test if that is really working. So let me go back to my CFM. I'll just comment this out. I'm creating a new instance of cfdeveloper at Summit, the class that we just discussed, and I'm trying to change the skill associated. Okay, so let me just run this again. So it will tell me that the final variable skill value change exception. So what it means is if a variable is declared as final, you can't change the value. So typically all your constants will be a part of the final variable. We also have a final method. So when a method is final, you can't override that method in the class that you extend from. So let's take an example here. So if I go to developer.cfc, let's take this for an example. So I have this respond to urgent emails. So I just want to ensure that nobody can override this function. So I'm just going to call it final function respond to urgent emails. And if I try to implement this, it's going to error out again. If I try to override this in my CF developer class, it has to error out. So let's quickly check that. If I run this example again, so you cannot override a final method. So I can't override a final method. Let me just comment this out for now. So that's the final variable. Now we have the final CFC as well. So I can make a CFC or a component final. So let's take the example of JS developer. JavaScript developers are JavaScript developers. There's no advanced JavaScript developer, right? You either know JavaScript or don't know JavaScript. You can't say that I know DOM manipulation really well, so I'm an advanced JavaScript developer. You can't really say that, right? So I don't want anybody to extend the JavaScript developer class, so I can make the class final. So I've made the final, the component itself as final. Now if I try to create something like an advanced JavaScript developer extending from JS developer, it's going to fail now. So I can prevent this from happening by making the component final itself. So if when I try to run this, it's going to say that the variable itself is fine. The component itself is final, so you can't extend the component. So these are some of the new capabilities that we introduced in ColdFusion 2018 from an object-oriented programming perspective. So on to our next adventure. The audio would have been fine, but audio is not coming up. Okay, so that is a really popular roller coaster in Las Vegas again. We are doing the developers Las Vegas, so that is the Desperado at Buffalo Bills Hotel. And the corresponding feature that we are going to discuss now that can really speed up your applications is asynchronous programming. So the way I would like to describe asynchronous programming is through an example that all of us can relate. I spoke about this in my session last year, so I'm going to bring that example again, and we'll also see some code to actually simulate this. All of us have this dilemma during the conference. We all think that we have to have a good time in the conference, but it rarely happens. Work pops up, right? So we have to manage the work, and at the same time, you have to have a good time at the conference, learn stuff, implement it back. So we always have this conflicting goals. How many of you feel that you face this conflict? I definitely do at every single conference. All of us can relate to that, right? So these are the various tasks that is typically associated with this conflicting goals. So you have to respond to urgent emails when work pops up. You have to meet deadlines. So it doesn't matter if you're at a conference, you still have to take care of work. You have to be available on all the calls. And on the conference side, as I said, the same example that we took, you would have made a promise to your boss to show some ROI, implement at least 3 best practices, and you would have made a promise to self, the same CF developer example that we saw, promise to self to have a good time, perhaps win at least $500 at the craps table. Now, if only we had asynchronous programming in our lives, we could have handled this state really well. So I'm going to show you how you can handle such conflicting goals using the new asynchronous programming in ColdFusion 2018. So I have some quick pseudocode while your business trip does not end. This is an infinite while loop, right? You keep checking urgent emails, work to meet deadlines, and check for important calls. But what's going to happen to the promise that you had where you want to implement the best practices by learning at the conference? Who's going to take care of that? So that is when the new run async function comes into play. So run async is kind of like a magic function. So run async, pass the learn best practices. So what this does is it creates a new thread and executes learn best practices in parallel to your existing main function. So that is the beauty of it. It's so simple. And it returns a future. We'll talk about future later on, but it generally returns a future that you can use later on. So if I have to simulate this, I have a quick example. As I said, we will see a lot of code, but simple examples that all of us can understand and get a good understanding of all the ColdFusion 2018 capabilities. Okay, so let's get into async programming. Stage 2 is what I want. Stage 2, I have a future run async. I have a while loop here. I just have less than 10 because I want the program to end because we have to go carry on with our session. So I have respond to urgent emails, meet deadline, be available on calls as various functions that just output the task associated. And this is a while loop that runs for 10 times. And this learn best practices now is going to run parallelly. So if I run this program, you will see that the while loop executes as well as the learn best practices keeps happening in parallel. So when I try to run this, let me just go ahead and run this example. So I have to go to asynchronous programming, run the stage 2. Okay, so it is outputting a lot of log statements out there. So you can see that I have respond to urgent emails, learning best practices, meet deadline, but learn best practices is also executing in parallel. So it's not just the while loop. So this is happening in a different thread because of the magic that run async does, right? So does it make sense? Are you able to get this example? Okay, great. So let's move on with the presentation, the next variation. So we spoke about the promise to self as well. So you would want to have a good time in Las Vegas. So run async, best practice, and then go win at the craps table as well, right? So let's see how this works. So you can actually chain functions to the run async, and those execute in parallel as well. So if I try to run this other variation that I have, which has the .then function, I just want to show this to you. Future run async .then keep winning at the craps table. So let's run this and see what happens. So stage 3. This is a really powerful concept. So we have a full session after lunch, which Chirag is going to take care of. So I definitely recommend that you attend the full session to get a good understanding of run async. So I'm introducing the concept. So he's going to have a full-blown session as well. So when I run this, stage 3, it's going to output everything along with winning at the craps table. So that is also happening. So you're doing everything in parallel at the same time taking care of work. So that is what we are seeing there. But what about the scenario where you are so bugged with the conference that after day 1, you need a timeout. You don't want to do anything else after day 1. So that is when you would associate a timeout. Learn best practices, end after 1 day. I'm not going to do anything else, just end after the first day. So you can do this as well in asynchronous programming. So all you have to do is just go back here, go to stage 4.cfm, which I have here, and I have a timeout of 4,000 milliseconds just to simulate this. This is in milliseconds, the variable, the parameter. So when you run this, this only executes for 4 seconds and then shuts down. So if I run this example here, you will see that it'll only execute, it'll only execute for a certain short duration and then end. Let me just go back here and find that CFM. Okay. So you will see that this executes and it has a timeout exception at the end of 4 milliseconds. So you're done with the learn best practices. So that is at your time. When the timeout executes, it no longer continues to happen. We also have an error handler. So what if you wanted to win at the craps table, but you end up losing a lot of money? Right? That is when you just need to get out of the casino, right? So you can actually associate an error handler to your asynchronous programming, and that is get out of casino. I'll just show you how this works in the code. So I have to go to stage5.cfm here, and I'll show you how this works. So I have learn best practices, then win, and I have an error handler as well, which is getting out of the casino. So to simulate this, what I have here is I have, if I go to win, keep winning at the craps table, so I have simulated this by throwing a message saying that I lost everything. So that is when the error handler would kick in, and it will say that getting out of here. So when I run this example, which is stage 5, so let me just go run this. So it'll invoke the error handler. So all the things that are happening in parallel, winning at the craps table, even that keeps happening, but the error kicks in and it invokes the error handler. So that is how easy asynchronous programming is. You just need to know this simple examples. This scenario itself, if you just recall this scenario that I just described, that itself is an easy way to recall how asynchronous programming works. So what if I want to get the result back? So we executed something in parallel, but how do I get the result back? So that is where the future variable comes into picture. So if I have a future, so I have run async.then. Let me just expand this so that you can see the full code. So run async.then.error, but it's returning a future. Now, if I do a future.get, it's going to return the result from the keep winning craps table. So I'm just trying to return a string here, which is nothing but, let me just show you that. So I'm returning done with the casino. So if I do a future.get, I should ideally get this. So I hope you're able to visualize this. Things are happening in parallel in a different thread, but I want to access the result back in my main thread. So that is how future.get can be used to access this result in the main thread. So if I run this, you will see that it's a pretty simple output. If I run this, again, all the things will get executed in parallel. And eventually, you will see the result as well, which is done with the casino, the string that I just showed you. So winning at the craps table, and then done with the casino. So the future.get returned this variable back from the function. So this is the power of asynchronous programming. With just a few lines of code, you can execute something parallelly and reduce your end user response time significantly. So if you have an IO intensive task or a network task, you can just offload it onto run async and get the result easily. So this is a really powerful feature in ColdFusion 2018. So there are various other methods available on future. You can do a get. You can check if the parallel execution is done through the is done. You can cancel the parallel execution as well through the future. So all of this are various other methods available. So that is how easy asynchronous programming is. Do you guys like asynchronous programming? Great. Awesome. All right, moving on to our next adventure, which is a roller coaster. That's the popular roller coaster in New York, New York. Okay, so that's the Manhattan Express roller in New York, New York. So we are going to discuss all about arrays in this section. So we have something called as typed arrays in ColdFusion 2018. And then we have negative index and slicing as well. So these are really interesting capabilities. Just a simple array can manage so much with this new powerful features. So let me just show you the code for all of this. The first one is a typed array. So let me go to arrays, typed array, a simple.cfm. I'm trying to create an array of numeric type. So what I mean by that is it can accept only numbers. You can't insert anything else onto that array. So when I do a array.append, so you don't have to use array append. I'm sure most of you know that we have this capability called member functions. You can do an object dot and invoke a function on the data type. So you can do array object dot append. You don't have to use array append. So this is the new member function that was introduced. It's not new actually. It's been quite some time since ColdFusion 11. So you can do an array dot append and then append something. So this is going to error out because I'm creating a numeric array, but I'm just trying to bring in a string into the numeric array. So it should definitely error out. So when I try to do this, so let me just run this code. Array, all these are powerful new capabilities in ColdFusion 2018. When I run this, it's going to tell me that element of type string cannot be added to a numeric type. So you can customize your arrays this way. So this is just a simple example. Where it gets really interesting is, let's say you have an array of value objects that you're trying to return from your CFC back to JSON. And you want to ensure that your JSON response actually confines to a particular CFC. So when you're creating an array, it's not just numeric or string. You can actually pass a fully qualified CFC name as well. So in my case, I'm just creating an array that only accepts art CFCs, instances of art CFCs. You can't insert anything else. So this kind of ensures the contract between the calling function and the called function. So any append that can happen onto this array has to be of art type. So this is how I can ensure typed arrays using CFCs as well in ColdFusion 2018. So that's the typed array. Let's go to negative indices. So this is really interesting. Okay, I have a really simple example again. Whoops, that's not the one. Negative index. My laptop is not charging for some reason. Anyway, so let's see. So array new. So I have an array and I'm inserting 100 elements onto the array. Very simple stuff, right? So the code is visible, right? I just want to ensure that the code is visible. Good. Okay. So I have an array and I'm trying to append elements onto the array, one after the other. So I have 100 elements, 100 digits actually, from 1 to 100, and I'm putting it all on the array. Now, what is really interesting is, so I have a write dump. Now, think about it. How do I access the last element? I know how to access the first element, which is 1. I know how to access the second element, which is 2. But how do I access the last element on the other side? So that is where the powerful negative indices can come into play. So you have to just do a -1 to go to the last element. It is as simple as that. So just do a -1 and you'll get the 100th element, or the last element in our case. And what if you have to access the 99th element? That is -2. So I have 100 elements there, 100 indices, 100 entries in my array. So if I have to go to the 99th one, I just have to say array -2. If I have to go to the 96th, it is array -5. It's a very simple concept, right? So if I run this, so earlier negative indices used to bomb, it used to error out. So no longer. So you can access the last element with ease using the negative indices. So if I go here, run it, so that's just the dump, and you will see the last element is 100, 99, 96. So really powerful. So an extension of negative indices, it's not really an extension, it's a new feature again, is array slicing. You can slice the arrays with ease using ColdFusion 2018. So let me show you an example again. So simple array, I have 100 elements again. So I'm not trying to dump this time. So I want to split this array into 2. The first 50 elements in one array and 51 to 100 in another array. So how do I go about doing this? All I have to do is 1:50. If I do this, the first 50 elements will be split into this array 1, and 51 to 100, so you get the next 50 in array 2. So when I try to dump this, you will see that I have two different arrays sliced equally, because that is what I wanted. So this is the start index. The first thing that you see here is the start index, and this is the end index. When you run this, you will see that I have two different arrays. So let me just show you this. So I have array 1, so this is not the negative index. I have to go to array slicing. Let me just go to array slicing. So I have one array from 1 to 50. Let me just increase the font size so that all of you can see at the back. So 1 to 50 is in one array, and 51 to 100 is in the second array. It's as simple as this. I just have to use the start index, end index, and get things going. So I want to show you an interesting variation of this array slicing. So let me just block this for now. So let's say I want to, so we have 1 to 100, right? I want to have only even numbered positions in my array from 2 to 50. How do I do that? So you can accomplish such interesting stuff as well. So all I have is array 2 goes all the way to 50. This is the start index. This is the end index. And I'm jumping positions here. So this last variable, last attribute here, that is used to increment the count. So by default, it is 1. So in my previous case, I did not provide 1 because I wanted all the elements from 1 to 50. But in this case, I want the jump to happen every other element. So that is when I would use 2, 50, and 2. So what this would output is an array with 2, 4, 6, 8 till 50. So let me just go ahead and quickly run this example. So that is what you get. It just has 25 elements with 2, 4, 6, 8 going all the way to 50. So that is the power of array slicing. So I have a trick question later on this. So anybody who attempts that at the end of my presentation will get a $50 Amazon voucher. So just keep an eye on how to use this array slicing. Let's see how that works later on as to who was able to answer my question at the very last. All right, so that is the arrays. So next one, we move on to the next adventure, which is diving with the sharks at Mandalay Bay. Anybody's tried this here? Nobody's as adventurous? Okay. Okay, so that's the Shark Reef Aquarium at Mandalay Bay where you can dive with sharks. So the corresponding feature I have is, I don't know if you noticed, I did not have any semicolons at all in my code. That is not needed in ColdFusion 2018. It's completely optional. So let me just show you this. If you have not realized it, I'll just show you this. If you see this, I have not ended this with a semicolon at all. So you don't have to provide that. Now, some of you may argue that, you know what, without that semicolon, the readability gets messed up. You know what, initially when I started out trying this out, even I felt that somehow the readability is not so great, but it's just a matter of getting used to it. So I now like this syntax. I don't provide a semicolon to end my statements at all now. And if you still want to end it with a forced semicolon, you can just provide that. It's optional now. It's not enforced in ColdFusion 2018. So that is what I had under diving with the sharks. Now, I want to spend the remaining time giving you a good sense of what's coming up in future as well. So that's the desert ride in Las Vegas. I've never done this. Okay, so what's coming up? We have support for something called as Lambda. Anybody knows how Lambda functions work here? Not a lot. Okay, I'll show you some code for Lambda as well. And we have some new array functions: pop, push, shift, unshift, splice. So all the ColdFusion 2018 stuff that you saw, so all those are some of the really important language improvements. It is just not possible to cover all the language enhancements in a single session, but I wanted to spend some time to let you know that language is something that we constantly try to improve. So we are already in the process of working on some of those. So I would like to introduce this to you and get your feedback as well. I have a survey where I would like you to rank this. So pay attention to all these new features. I would like to get your feedback as well. The first one is support for Lambda. So Let me just show you some code for Lambda. What's coming up? Okay. So Lambda is here. So I have a really simple example that all of us can understand. Okay, so I have a function that is just doing a multiplication. It takes in 2 parameters and returns a star b. Simple example, right? So when I run this, it's going to output the product of a star b. As simple as that. Now, I can create a lambda function for this, which is a really nice shorthand operator. It's also called the arrow operator. So let me just show you this. So I can create a function, mul, the same mul that I had in the first place. It takes equal to, I have 2 parameters that it takes, a and b. Now I have an arrow function, which is a combination of equal to and a greater than sign. So that's the arrow function. And I can just return a star b. So I don't need all that 3 lines of code. This is a super shortcut for any kind of closures that you may want to have. So when you run this, it executes the same way as the mul that executed there, which was just multiplying 2 variables. So similarly, slightly complex examples here. I have a number array, 10, 20, 30, goes on up till 100. I'm trying to filter this array, and I have a callback function here, which takes in a parameter. So this is a lambda function again, so I don't have the function name or the function keyword if you notice. So I'm directly getting into function definition, any array entry, and I have the arrow operator or the lambda function here. This is where I define my function. If array entry is less than 100, I return false. If it is greater than 100, it returns true. So what this is effectively doing is, it is filtering the array. Any elements that is greater than 100 will be stripped off. It will not be available in my array. Anything less than, oh, it's actually the reverse. So anything less than 100 will return false, and anything over 100 will return true. So the 150, 400, and it's only 150, 400, and 100 that will be retained in my array, and everything else will be just discarded. So I'm doing a filtering function using the new lambda capability that's going to come up. If you don't have it yet, this is work in progress. So similarly, we have new array functions as well. We saw quite a lot of array functions, the typed array, negative indices, all this stuff. Similarly, we have pop, push, shift, unshift, and splice. So some quick code for this as well. So this is new stuff, which is exciting. So coming up, let me go to array functions, which is sample.cfm here. So I can actually pop out elements from an array. So I can push elements. So it's like a stack. It works like a stack. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I do an array push, the 6 will be inserted to the end of the array. I can also do a pop. So pop just retrieves or removes the last element and gives it back to me, array pop. And I have array shift as well. So shift is interesting. It's just like the pop and push, but it happens at the beginning of the array. So I can do an array shift. It'll just remove the first element from the array. And if I do an unshift, it's going to put that element back. So it's going to insert something at the very first. So that is shift. Splice. This is a really powerful function. So I have a month array. So I have Jan, March, April, June. So I intentionally have left out Feb, the month Feb. So I have this available in an array which just has one element Feb. Now, what the splice function does is you can actually insert an array in between an array as well at a specific point. So I can do an array splice, months, start with index 2. So at position 2, I want to insert the item array. And the 0 indicates that I don't want to remove any element. So you can actually replace elements as well, saying that how many elements you want to replace from that position. I don't want to replace anything. I don't want to remove anything. So that's why I have 0. So months to 0 items. So what this will do is this will go ahead and insert the Feb array in that entire list. So Jan, Feb, March, April, June. So that'll get the corresponding array back. So those are some of the new array functions that you're planning to introduce going forward. Some really useful query functions as well. So let me just show you that real quick. So we have a really powerful or the new way of creating a new query. So let me just show you that. Sample.cfm. So this is the old way of creating a query. I'm sure most of you know this. I need to pass in the column name. If there is an associated column type, I have to pass that. and all my values as an array of struct. I don't have to do this anymore. It's super simple now. So I can do a query new and pass in a struct, an array of structs, which has ID, name. So these are my various column names, ID, name, and paid. So these are the various column names I have, and I can pass in the corresponding values right there and create a new query in just a few lines of code. So we are planning to introduce query append as well, wherein which you can append one query object to another. So you can just merge two queries together. You can easily do that. And query prepend as well. So you can prepend a query. So if you have query 1 to be prepended to query 1, so before query 1, you can easily do that with query prepend. We also have query row swap. So you can swap a particular row in your query. So I can do a my query 2, 3. So what this does is it just swaps the position of 2 and 3. The rows 2 and 3. That's query swap, row swap, and then I have query slice as well. So I can slice the query as well. Just like the array slice, I can do this as well. So my query 2 and 3. So starting with position 2, give me 3 different rows of the query. So I can slice the query easily using the new functionality. Query clear, this is again a new function that we are planning to introduce, which just clears everything in my query. Okay. So we also have sum and every. That is really interesting. It is again to figure out entries in your array and struct. So this is something new that will come up. So this is just a sneak peek into what's coming up. So here, I'll show you how the sum works. So I have an array, 2, 4, 6, 8 goes on till 12. And I have an arrow function again, the arrow function that I just told you about. So I have 3 parameters to my lambda function or the arrow function element index array. This is where the arrow operator comes in, and I'm returning true if the element is greater than 10. So when I do an array sum on this, what it's going to check is there at least one element that actually has a value greater than 10? So I can do an array sum and pass this. So it will give me true if there is at least one element that passes this criteria. We also have array every. So what this does is it checks if every single element actually qualifies under that criteria. So that is array every. So this will be supported on structs as well. So I can do a struct sum and pass in a lambda or a closure to that and see if it can, if at least one element in the struct or one key value pair in the struct pertains to a certain criteria. Struct every single value is checked. Similarly for query. So query also will have sum and every. So this is something that is coming up. So now I want your feedback on this. So I have a survey that is available for you to take now. So if you go to, so I just want all of you to go to surveymonkey.com. Your feedback is valuable for us. So this is a nice ranking question. You can rank what you just saw, the lambda, the new array functions, the query functions, as well as the sum and every that you saw. So just go to this URL, surveymonkey.com/r/language2018. I also have a QR code if somebody wants to use the QR code, but the URL is pretty simple. So if you go to surveymonkey.com/r/language2018, you will see a question that asks you to rank the features that you just saw based on what you feel is important. So we want to go by what is really important for you. So that is why we have the survey to capture your feedback. Is anybody able to open this survey link? Okay. What about the rest? You're able to open it? Your feedback is really valuable, so it will help if you can provide this feedback to us now. So I'm going to see the result right now. So let us go and watch the result to figure out what is important so that all of you have a sense of what is important for all you developers sitting in my session today. Support for Lambda, array functions is the top, array and query functions is at the top. I only have 21 responses. Come on, I need more. URL again? Okay. surveymonkey.com/r/language2018. So it looks like array functions and query functions is something that you like when compared to the others, which is good to see. Just going to was there a question? Yep. Yeah? Array dump. We don't have anything. The right dump works, but what's the use case? Array dump, why would you want that? Okay. Correct. Array to a function? Yeah, you can do that. So you're talking about, I think you're asking me a question where you can do an array.slice and pass in the sliced arrays onto a different function, something like that. Yeah, you can do that. Absolutely, that will be supported, definitely. So this is how we are planning to advance CFML with every version. And everything will continue to be backward compatible. That's our promise. So as the language advances, your existing applications will continue to work. So clearly, arrays and query functions is the one that you really like. So before I wrap up and open up for questions, I have this trick question that I told you about. So the person who answers this gets a $50 Amazon voucher right here. So it's about array slicing. So let me just go back to array slicing. So this is kind of a trick question. If nobody gets it, I'll try to see if I can provide some hints. If somebody gets it, great. So we saw this, right? Array slice. This is the start index. This is the end index. And this is the jump, the number of hops that you need to make. Now, let's say I have to reverse the array. Okay, so I want 100 to 1 using array slicing. How would you go about doing this? Go ahead, one at a time, please. What's the start number, end number? This is 100 elements, right? So how would you go about it? You got it right. It's not 100, it's -1, so that's absolutely right. So yeah, you get the $50 voucher, so it's like, if I do array 4, that's right. So if I do array -1, because I want it from the last element, to 1, which is my first element, but I don't want -1 to become 1 straight away. I want it to wrap, I want it to go negative, right? The count is negative. So I do a -1 again. So this is what will reverse the entire array. So if you want to see this in action, we can do that. So let me just run the arrays here, array slicing. Yeah, there you go. So this is the second one here. So using the simple -1, 1, -1, I get an array that is completely reversed. So this is a really, really powerful feature. So all this will be available is already available in ColdFusion 2018. So my goal was to introduce you to all the powerful capabilities of ColdFusion 2018 and also give you a sneak into what's coming up. So the language will continue to progress further and we will interact with most of you on the pre-release. So if anybody is not aware of the pre-release, do follow our blogs. We'll open up the pre-release soon for some of the language features where you can interact with our engineers and provide your valuable feedback. So that is really important to take CFML to the next level. So with that, I come to the end of my session. So the floor is open for any kind of questions that you may have. I see a hand there already. Okay. Can you speak up a little bit, or maybe a mic would have helped here actually. I can't. So integers are preserved as integers, so you don't have to worry about that at all. So you're talking about functions or integers or numeric? To validate if it's numerical. Oh, okay. So yeah, the is valid. So I think you can validate a type. We don't have any explicit validation right now, but something to think about. I don't know if my engineers back there have an answer to that. Do we have any validation on numeric, guys? Mayur, Emmanuel, are you aware of any validation on numeric types? So for instance, if I have, let's say, an integer 13, and if I have to validate it's actually a number, do we have a way of doing it? Is numeric? So it's already there then. Is that a question?
Is numeric function is there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, there you go. It's already there. So we don't have to implement anything new. It's already there. So before everybody leaves, please give us your feedback. That is really useful. And every feedback will automatically draw into a raffle as well. So this feedback will help us make ColdFusion Summit better year over year. So please leave your feedback, the session feedback. Is there a question? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, on the asynchronous, 2 questions.
Yeah.
The timeout, does that trigger the error portion of it? And does getting the value of future, is that the equivalent of a thread join where it blocks until it's ready?
Okay, I got the first question. I didn't get the second question. Your first question was, let me just repeat the question. So if something times out, will it invoke the error handler? It doesn't. So timeout is not an error condition. So your then function as well as your run async takes a timeout, and then function also takes a timeout. It doesn't invoke an error handler. It's just that it stops execution at that point of time. What was your second question? I really did not get that.
The second portion is when you get the value of future with the get, is that the equivalent of a thread join in that it blocks until it's done?
Yes, it's kind of like thread join. So it's a blocking call. So that's how it is similar to join perhaps. So if you do a future.get, so it's a blocking call. It executes only when the result comes back. Yeah. Yeah.
If I want to insert new values into that query,
Mm-hmm.
do you have a special function for that now, or am I using CSS?
No, there is query add row. So I didn't show an example. So there's query add row, delete column. So add row has always been there. You can add a row to a query. You can delete a row to a query. You can delete a column. So all those functions are in place. You can do that. Yes.
Cool. Does null support and Datatype preservation need to be explicitly turned on, or is it turned on by default?
So Datatype preservation runs by default. If you have to explicitly turn it on, there's a JVM flag available. But we don't recommend turning that off because that is how it has to function. Null is independent of Datatype preservation. So Null has application CFC setting called enable null support. So there are 2 different features. So enable null support will enable only null. And which one? The Datatype preservation? No, null is not turned on by default. So we realize the implication there. So that's not backward compatible. So we don't turn on null by default. You have to explicitly turn it on. As I said, backward compatibility is really important for us. So we don't make that move. So by default, it's false. Sorry? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can turn it on. So that's a global setting in the admin. There's an application CFC setting in application CFC. Yes.
So are Lambda functions going to be available in components or just closures?
Who's speaking? Are you? Okay. Yeah.
Are Lambda functions going to be available in closures or in components, or are they just going to be closures initially? So can you define your functions in a component with Lambda functions?
I really did not get the question. It was on closures and Lambda.
So can I create a component with all of the functions defined as Lambda functions, or is that only reserved for closures right now?
It's mostly for closures. You normally wouldn't use it within a component. It's mostly for closures. So yes. Any other questions? So I also have one other $25 gift voucher for an interesting question. So I need to figure that out. So if you have any questions, feel free. Yes, go ahead.
And this may have been answered before. Most of those functions, will they be available as member functions as well?
Which functions you mean?
For example, array, slice, or anything else?
Absolutely. All of those will be member functions. Definitely. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So everything is a member function. Clearly. Yes.
So with array type.
Mm-hmm. Typed arrays, okay.
When we choose the component.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Are we honoring the properties for that component if it's a string or it's a boolean? Let's say you build an array in R. One of the elements in the R was boolean, it has to be string. Even though you said it's an array of R elements.
No, so that strict type checking doesn't happen. So we try to preserve the type. So you can't explicitly call it. So that is not that valid. So the question was, so can I enforce type validation on an art CFC? Let's say the example that we saw. Can I declare a variable and Boolean if I try to assign a string, will it error out, right? So we're not doing that strict type checking yet.
So when you make the type of return, let's say, array type,
Yeah, yeah.
it should match whatever that art is.
Yeah, it should. So it'll just check if it's an instance of array with those properties in it. That's about it.
Deep checking.
It's not deep checking. So that's a good question. So you get that $25. Okay. Anybody else? Wow, a lot of questions. I like this. Go ahead.
How many threads can you run in a run asynchronous?
So you get to manage your thread pool. So there's an admin setting wherein which you can define your thread pool. If I'm not wrong, you can define it within the program as well, saying that how many thread pools you want for your asynchronous programming to kick in. So all of that is manageable. You have full control on that.
Okay. Is there a way to deal with runaway threads?
Sorry, what was that?
Is there a way to deal with runaway threads?
Deal with runaway threads? I'm not really sure actually, so I'm not sure. I need to check with my engineers there, so I'm not sure. Yes, go ahead. CF transaction asynchronous? Uh-huh. Yep. CF transaction in asynchronous programming.
Okay, you have to know where you are using the transaction. And if you have a transaction in one block, then block it, and let's say you have an error, if you don't have a trying catch, you have to continue to go through that. Otherwise, it's your responsibility when it's an error to handle, because those are silent processes. So it's a matter of fact, you see a transaction involved itself. You have to have the catching error somehow, and either either put an X or stop it completely. Refill exception.
Okay, so just to let you know, we have our engineering team. Quite a few engineers have traveled, who build your favorite product are right here at the Adobe booth. So if you want to interact with the engineers who build ColdFusion, they can give you a lot of insight. So go have a chat with them as well. Suresh, who's our engineering head, is right there. So he takes care of the entire engineering for ColdFusion. So if you have any engineering questions which I may not be able to answer, they are the best people to answer. So thanks for coming. Hope the session was useful. There's one more question? Okay, go ahead.
No, he was wondering if there's a link he can sign on to get the presentation from.
Get the presentation from, you will get it. So all the slide decks of ColdFusion Summit will be available to every single attendee. We will blog about it as well. So just watch ColdFusion community portal, coldfusion.adobe.com. So that is the community portal for anything ColdFusion. So it has a lot of valuable information. So you will see a blog post from us talking about where you can find all the slide decks. And I think all the attendees will also get an email saying that here is where you can download all the slide decks from. Great. Thanks a lot for coming and hope you have a great CF Summit. And I'll definitely see you at the pool party later tonight. Thank you.